Good evening and welcome everybody. I'm John Spires, the Chief Executive of the Royal Free Charity, and we are delighted to be hosting the 2023 Marsden Lecture on behalf of the Royal Free London NHS Foundation Trust. This evening's event is taking place in the magnificent Pears building in front of a live audience, and we're also streaming to a very large number of online guests. Whether you're watching on screen or you're here with us in person, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce the Chair of the Royal Free Charity, Judy de Winter.
Good evening, everyone. As you heard, my name's Judy de Winter. I'm Chair of the Royal Free Charity, and I'd like to really warmly welcome all of you here to this year's Marsden Lecture. Our story today is rooted in the enduring legacy of Dr William Marsden, a compassionate physician who founded the Royal Free Hospital in 1828. William Marsden didn't want to accept the fate of an individual who was not allowed access to treatment because she couldn't afford it. And he acted on what was in the best interests of what would benefit many, many others in the future. His relentless commitment to providing healthcare free at the point of use foreshadowed the principles on which the NHS has been built. And tonight's lecture, the Marsden Lecture, is named in his honour. The Marsden Lecture serves as a reminder of the profound impact that one individual's vision and dedication can have on the course of history. And his story pays testament to the impact of philanthropy, to which the Royal Free owes its existence, and in fact, without which this wonderful building that we're gathered in this evening would simply not exist. Many of you here in the room this evening and those watching remotely have supported the Royal Free Charity through either giving time, advocacy or donations, and I really want to take this opportunity to thank you. It's because of that support that we and the Royal Free London can go further and faster towards achieving our joint clinical and research ambitions. Every year, we invite a guest speaker to explore the big issues at the heart of our healthcare system. I would like to personally thank our esteemed guest, Sir David Sloman, for accepting our invitation to share his invaluable insights with us this evening. And in a moment, you'll hear from the Royal Free London's Chief Medical Officer, Dr Gillian Smith, who will introduce our guest speaker to you. But before I hand over, I would like to extend a particular welcome to two distinguished previous Royal Free Medical Directors, Professor Sir Stephen Powis, the NHS England's National Medical Director, and Dr Chris Strether, Medical Director for the NHS in London. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to Dr Gillian Smith, the Chief Medical Officer of the Royal Free London NHS Foundation Trust. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, our speaker for this year's Marsden Lecture is familiar to many of you watching online or indeed attending here this evening as the former Group Chief Executive of the Royal Free London. During his period of leadership, the Royal Free London acquired Foundation Trust status, which was a huge milestone in our history. He oversaw the introduction of Barnet and Chase Farm hospitals into the Royal Free family in 2014, and the subsequent opening of the new £200 million Chase Farm Hospital, the most digitally advanced hospital in the NHS. With an extensive career in healthcare management, his most recent contribution has been with NHS England. And it was during his time as Regional Director for the NHS in London that the COVID-19 pandemic struck. And many of us will always remember his inspirational leadership and unwavering support for health services across the capital as we faced what was an enormous and unprecedented challenge. As the impact of COVID-19 continued to reverberate across every facet of the NHS, really, his next move was to NHS England national team, where until recently he was Chief Operating Officer. His outstanding contribution to healthcare policy and leadership was recognised with a knighthood for services to the NHS. And last year, he was described as the fourth most influential person in English health policy, a testament to his impact on the broader healthcare landscape. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome, and I would ask you to please join me in welcoming Sir David Sloman.
Thank you, Judy, thank you. Thank you for those very, very kind words of introduction. And can I say, it is an absolute pleasure and privilege for me to be here tonight. This is genuinely one of the highlights of my career. And as my talk works its way through, I hope you will start to understand why. It means an awful lot to me to be here this evening. So, as has been described, I was the Chief Operating Officer of the NHS until about 3 months ago, when I left after a 40-year stretch or a 30-year sentence, depending on who you talk to. But I have come out the other end, and what I've been asked to do this evening is share my reflections on those 40 years, including what I've learned from working in the NHS over that period of time, and what I also think the years ahead of us look, as globally we grapple with what is a genuinely international healthcare challenge post-COVID. Now, I'm going to do so in a story of bugs, all which will be about to be revealed. But the other thing I would say, when I practiced this morning, I only cried 3 times. Yeah. So if I start to get a bit tearful and wobble, just talk amongst yourselves, because I do recover, is what I would say. The other thing to let you know about, just to put you on, get you on your mettle, there will be some audience participation, which I know is all. Everybody's eyes go down now when we talk about audience. So let's get things going. So let's start with first slide and bug number 1, please. So, what do we think this is? Anybody know what this is? Well, in a way, it's very reassuring that none of you do, because it's syphilis. So this is bug number 1, and this is syphilis. And of course, I thought that would be a very tasteful way to kick the evening off. So the reason we've done this is, as we've heard, of course, in 1828, William Marsden found a young woman dying on the streets. And the reason she was dying on the streets is that she had no money for healthcare. Yeah, so William Marsden took her in, and he looked after her, and at that point he determined that he would create a hospital that was free at the point of need and free at the point of delivery. And that's the point at which the free hospital was established. Now, we now know that that woman had syphilis, and she actually died of syphilis. And the Royal Free was also the first hospital to admit patients with syphilis. Yeah, so a very, very, very profound social cause. And there's a great piece of the original notation of the hospital says Marsden emphasised that he wanted to open a hospital to which the only passport should be poverty and disease. Yeah, poverty and disease. Very, very profound. Which brings us on nicely to bug number 2. And slide number 2, please. Any idea on this one? Who said cholera? Well done, Philippa. And shame on you, you doctors and scientists, is the other thing I've got to say. Well done, the comms department. So this is So indeed, this is cholera, and as we know, in 1836, the cholera epidemic swept England, and the Free Hospital at the time was the only hospital in the UK to stay open during the cholera epidemic. Yeah, and that's the reason that Queen Victoria gave the Free Hospital its royal charter, so that's the point at which the Royal Free Hospital was formally created. So in a way, what we have here in this room this evening is 3 great images of 3 great people. So we've got William Marsden, as I say, in 1828, kicking it all off. Then Queen Victoria in 1836 giving it its royal charter, and then Nye Bevan creating the NHS in 1947. So actually what we've got in this room is very much the gestalt of the NHS. Yeah, it started here. And it's really important that we remember those origins of the NHS. Myself personally, I was born in Cardiff in 1961. And unlike that child at the beginning of the Schlondorf movie of the Tin Drum, or the child in the recent Ian McEwan novel Nutshell, I have no recollection of my birth whatsoever. My first memory of the NHS was 10 years later when I was admitted as an emergency to Cardiff Royal Infirmary with osteomyelitis, blood poisoning. And I was told by the good doctors and nurses told my parents, actually, I was either going to die of the infection or would die under the medicine that the doctors would need to give for me to pull through. Those are the choice my parents were given. They made the right one, I hasten to add. But I was told the best thing would happen is that I would walk with a limp for the rest of my life. But actually, as it turned out, I subsequently enjoyed many happy years playing rugby and squash, and still to this day manage to do 5K 2 or 3 times a week, running on a hip inserted by the good doctors and nurses again of this very hospital. Yeah? And the good news is I think I need another one soon. So just to keep that going. So I then joined the NHS as a national management trainee in 1983 in northwest London. Charing Cross Hospital is where I joined. Which, can I have the next slide, please? Because Charing Cross is born in made exactly the same architectural style and architectural era of this building. You know, that is a classic example of the predominant, the Bauhaus architecture, the Brutalists, or it's the Brutalist architecture of the day, which is probably best known to the doctors in this room as the architectural style of the Royal College of Physicians, and to the royal family as the architecture of the National Theatre, which is our current King's most hated building from the view of Parliament. It was built in 1974, this site, so it's coming up to 50 years old. And what those of you who use the hospital will know, that when you put money in, it really does scrub up well. If you visited the ITU department, if you've been to the A&E department, you'll see you put money in and you get something back for it. But nonetheless, we will never, ever, ever have the public sector capital we need to get every single bit of this building up to the quality and the standard that our staff would want and our patients deserve. Yeah? And that's because the limited capital will always go into the areas of greatest clinical risk. It might be the operating theatre, it might be the cabling, it might the electricity. When the electricity was put into this building, there were no such things as MRIs and CAT scans. Yeah, so the amount of money we've had to invest in infrastructure is material, and also in IT storage rooms. So we will never have the capital we need to create the environment which we want, which is why organisations such as the Royal Free Charity and other benefactors in the room this evening are so important if this hospital and this group of hospitals is really to achieve its mission of providing world-class clinical care supported by leading-edge research and best-in-class education and training. So we will continue to need help. When I trained as a trainee in 83, we did something called a Cook's Tour. Do people know what Cook's Tour? Remember Thomas Cook, the old original? So what I did is I spent a week in every department of the hospital and every department in the community health services. So I spent a week as a porter. Yeah, I spent a week as a junior doctor. People get really scared when I say that. I spent a week shadowing a junior doctor, would be more honest. But I also spent a fantastic week as a cleaner. Yeah, when I got to meet this. Have any of you ever tried to drive one of those? Can I just say, you don't drive it. It drives you. So I spent the first few days having to clean the spaces outside the lifts on the atrium. Not like the lifts here, when you come out, there's that atrium space. So my job was to get one of these, cleaning. And for the first 2 days, it was, you know, it was like some mothers do have them, or, you know, any of you old enough to remember. But after a few days, I just nailed it. You know, it was just a serene, me, the machine, and the squirty spray thing. You know, we were just absolutely flying. Until someone experienced old cleaner came over and tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "Slow down, mate, we got 3 days to do that." Now, I spoke to another person who trained a year after me, actually, last week. And we were both reflecting on how important those experiences were. Actually, that week with the porter, that week with the cleaner, still stays with me now in terms of the ability to do the job. From there, I moved to Bedford Hospital South Wing, up in Bedford, which I rapidly came to understand had one major objective in the world, and that was to hate Bedford Hospital North Wing, and at least to do better. I also shared a room with a surgical registrar, a junior doctor in training, who I regularly beat at backgammon and Scrabble, which is something he could just not get his head around, given that he was a doctor and I was a mere administrator. So he kept wanting more before he went to bed. I then went on to the London Chest Hospital in Bethnal Green, and it's there that I learnt the importance and the power of nursing leadership from the very formidable Miss Dale, who was the director of nursing. Now, I'm not sure Miss Dale had a first name. And can I say, if she did, none of us ever found out what it was. But really powerful experience. After which I crossed the river to go into the Brook General Hospital in Greenwich, where I was the general manager for medicine. And that was the era when the first time they allowed people like me to manage nurses. I can see some people remember the days of the Griffiths report and the shake-up that that actually made. And it's there that I really learned the importance of medical leadership, yeah, and the importance that if you get strong clinical leaders and strong managers working together, hand in hand, how you really, really can change things and make things happen. Now, I'm not sure if it's me, but the London Chest Hospital is now a Tesco's and the Brook General Hospital is now a Sainsbury's. So you want to be careful about where I go. Which brings us on to bug number 3. Anybody recognise this one? No? This is HIV. Yeah, so this is HIV. So my next major job, I was appointed as the Bloomsbury Health Authority as the AIDS and HIV coordinator, just into the south of Camden. And early on in my career, this was a really profoundly formative job, profoundly formative. In the face of something that we really didn't understand, which was quite frankly terrifying at the time, being part of a clinically led team with really strong clinical leadership, working in partnership with an extremely powerful and articulate patient voice, yeah, and alongside very committed and very bright academics, it was a real privilege and an education. And this hospital, again, played a huge part in that, absolutely huge part in that, with Professor Margaret Johnson establishing the Ian Chancellor Centre here, which is one of the most important HIV services in London then, as it is today, established in 1990. It was also in this job that I really first started to understand the importance of political leadership, yeah, the importance of the capital P politicians. So, next slide, please. So that's Norman Fowler, who is now Baron Fowler, who was the Secretary of State for Health at the time. And I don't know if many of you heard him in conversation with James Knockerty only a few weeks ago on Radio 4. Still talking today about how important he felt it was, and still feels that he, as a white, male, heterosexual Tory, was a person standing up and being the patient and service advocate in what, in retrospect, were still quite populist times then back in the day. Really, really important political leadership. It was also when I learnt the importance of soft power. Next slide, please. As demonstrated by the frequent visits of Princess Diana to the AIDS and HIV services across the UK and across the capital. And also, next slide, please, the fact that when President George Bush came over, his wife Barbara chose to visit the inpatient AIDS wards at UCLH, because at the time they were inpatient AIDS wards. So, for me, really important learning about both capital P power and soft P politics. And for little old me, it was one of my proudest moments is when I set up a dental clinic for people in HIV at the bottom of the clinic down the road, because at the time, dentists were anxious about seeing people. Yeah, so we set up, that was my very proud of that looking back. So I did that. From there, I popped over to the London Borough of Haringey and became responsible for organising services across the borough, including setting up breakfast clubs in all the schools at the time, back in the day. And also, again, one of my proudest moments was my annual winter slipper exchange scheme, when people used to bring in their slidey bottom slippers and we'd exchange for some good Velcro grippy slippers with a sound tread, the idea of which would keep people on their feet so they wouldn't end up in the A&E department during the winter. Really powerful stuff. And do you know what? I've still got a pair. They're really, really good. It's that wraparound Velcro that does the stuff. So did that, and it's also where I began to, this is where we started in the NHS looking at how to leverage the digital revolution. Yeah, so this was some of the early 80s, and then we did the first ever electronic choose and book, where you could book an appointment from a GP practice into a hospital. It was called Choose and Book at the time, and that happened locally between, next slide please, it was Dr Jatin Pandya, who was a Tottenham GP, and Norman Parker, who was the medical director of the Whittington in 2006. So that was the first ever Choose and Book, looking back. So after that, I went to work for the Whittington, over on the other side of the Heath as the chief executive, and I turned it, and within 4 weeks of turning up, the PFI company that was building the hospital went bust. Yeah, so that was my welcome to the Whittington. That was in true form. And it was my first experience of an organisation that we in the NHS we call the centre, but for those of you who work in other industries, you probably call it head office. You know, we're from head office, we're here to help. Yeah, so I gave the centre a call, and I said, the PFI has gone bust. What do you think we should do? And this bloke said, well, I don't know. I said, well, that's really helpful. I said, so what did we do last time? Which he said, never happened before. So I said, well, who's accountable for all of this? He said, you, and put the phone down. So I'm from head office. And then, so that was the Whittington. I had a great time there. But then I crossed the Heath. And this is my favourite slide, by the way. This is my favourite slide. To the Royal Free in an appointment which was compared by the Camden New Journal to the transfer of Cristiano Ronaldo from Manchester United to Real Madrid in Emmanuel Adebayor from Arsenal to Manchester City. And I thought my career had peaked. You can't move on further than that. And I have to say, I moved into the job here and was the Chief Executive Officer for 10 years, and it was absolutely fantastic. You know, real highlight of my career. I loved every second of it. Caroline and Pete were talking earlier on. I said to Caroline, it's the best job you'll ever have. It's the best job in the world. And I know Caroline has said to Pete, this is the best job in the world. Enjoy it. It's the staff here are brilliant, and the communities and the people that we work with and serve and the patients. It's a privilege. It's an absolutely fantastic job. And we did do some good stuff. As has been told, we won the Dr Foster's Hospital of the Year Award on my second year. We acquired Barnet and Chase Farm Hospitals. Next slide, please. That was Hospital of the Year. Next slide. Barnet and Chase Farm Hospitals. And we did become a digital global exemplar, building Chase Farm as the most digitally enabled hospital in the UK. In terms of learning, it's also here that I really learned the importance and power of research and what can be achieved if clinical research and clinical research and clinical service endeavours work hand in hand. Yeah? Research and clinical service side by side. Yeah? It's clinicians in this hospital who pioneered the research that has led us to be able to cure hepatitis C. I mean, that's an extraordinary sentence, actually, cure hepatitis C. Researchers working in this very building, and I had a pre-match tour by Hans Staus over here, which was great, actually, looking at what can be achieved in new treatments for type 1 diabetes and COVID vaccines and new stem cell and gene therapy treatments for immune-related conditions. And the proximity of the research facilities here to the clinical services over the road is what gives us a real opportunity to put bench science to work rapidly for the benefit of patient care. Yeah, this proximity is what it is absolutely all about. I learned that here. And it's also here that I gained a truly international and global perspective on health. It was Steve Powis here, he said, right, we're going to go abroad and look at something. And I said, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. But I had a real education in here that you must have a global perspective if you really are going to extend health and healthcare. And as we'll hear later, healthcare is a global challenge, and what I would say is nobody in the world has cracked it. Yeah, nobody has found the answer to how you provide a healthcare for a nation and its citizens. And it's also here that we meet bug number 4. Bug number 4. Bring up bug number 4. Bug number 4. Who's, pardon? You're not allowed to, you've got it. You did the slides. You're already cheating. Bug number 4. Any idea what bug number 4 might be? Ebola. That's right. It's Ebola. Because again, this is the hospitals in the NHS that stood up to meet the challenge of Ebola, if you recall, back in the day. And all 3 nurses, please, who returned from the UK, that you can see them there, that's Will Pooley, Pauline Kefkir, Anna Cross, were all cared for here in the high-intensity user service, and all 3, their lives were saved, actually, by the outstanding work of the people in the hospital. And who were those outstanding people? Can I have the next slide? It was this group of people, yeah? Because the other thing I've learned about in healthcare is it's all about a team sport. Yeah, and actually the porters and the cleaners who were responsible for disposing the clinical waste were as important to the public health of London as the doctors and nurses who cared for those patients and the respiratory physiotherapists who enabled those patients to breathe. Yeah, healthcare is always a team sport, always. And I don't care what AI and technology does. At the end of the day, it will come down to an intervention between a clinician, perhaps leading, but certainly being part of a team coming together around individual patients. And it's also, to come back, next slide please, where I re-met our old bug number 3 in Charleston Centre. I had the pleasure of celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Ian Charleston Centre at the Actors Church in Covent Garden. To which I turned up totally unprepared to walk into a candlelit scenario with people drinking champagne, to be marched up the front, to be sat next to Sir Ian McKellen, to be told I was speaking after him. That was the gig I was given. And not for the first time in my career, I really wish I'd prepared. But hey, I drew on those skills of the NHS Leadership Academy presentation skills and knocked it out of the park. So that's it. He didn't turn up like that, by the way. He really didn't turn up like that. So, after a very, very happy decade at the Royal Free, and I really did love it here, and it was a real wrench to leave, I was encouraged to, and I didn't need much encouragement actually, to go and be the regional director for the NHS in London. Yeah, so oversight of London and overseeing delivery of healthcare to a population of around 10 million people. Yeah, that's about the population of London. You know, I had oversight of about 8,500 GPs, 18 hospitals, 6 specialist trusts, 11 mental health trusts, and the London Ambulance Services. So it's a big, complex setup. And again, it was a real privilege. I honestly believe London is the world's best global city. Does anybody disagree? I am speaking to a biased audience, so I do kind of get that. And it's very, very different from the rest of the UK. So London's geography, and there's a reason I'm telling this story, is about 700 square miles. It's urban, and it's got the best integrated public transport system of any city in the world. Yeah, it's a big city, it's urban, and you can get around it. In terms of its demography, it's got a population which on average is 5 years younger than the rest of the UK population, so it's a young population. About 42% of the population of London come from black and minority ethnic communities, and it churns. It doesn't stay still, London. It doesn't stay still. Yeah, so somebody used to describe it as like servicing jelly. You know, it just wobbles, it wobbles, it wobbles. And in terms of the healthcare infrastructure, it's got the biggest concentration of secondary healthcare of any city in the world. Yeah? And there's 2 main reasons for that. Firstly, London has always been a global transport hub. Yeah, and secondly, it's because we've been at it a long, long time. So Barts Health is currently this year celebrating its 900th anniversary. So it's 3 times older than the United States of America. Yeah, so very, very, very defined features in London. So my first job was working in London, generating a vision for London, and our ambition was to make London the world's healthiest global city. Next, please. And we managed people to sign up to a plan, actually, to make London the world's healthiest global city. That was our ambition. And you can measure that. There are ways of measuring that. And at the time, we were the 7th healthiest global city. But we set ourselves some challenges about doing some things that would make the difference, be it air quality, be it AIDS and HIV, whatever it was. And we were just about to get going. We all signed off. And then bug number 5 turned up. Bug number 5, please. So what's that one? Yeah, everybody knows that one, don't they? Yeah, that's COVID. So my job was to lead the NHS in London through the global pandemic, as Gillian has said. And even now, when I say that, you know, your hairs stand up at the back of your neck, actually. Just such an extraordinary thing to have done. And of course, one of the things I've been asked to talk about is what it was like. What it was like at that moment, what it was like doing those things. And in the light of the public inquiry, which is a really important public inquiry, there are things I can say and will say, and there are things I shouldn't say and won't say. But it's really, really important that we talk about it. And the other thing when you talk about COVID is that I know that absolutely everybody in this room has been affected by COVID in one way or another, yeah, without exception. So it's a difficult thing to talk about. And some lives have been more affected than others. I know people who have lost relatives, people who have lost partners, and I know people whose children have had a huge detrimental impact on their education, will take many years to recover. My own daughter did only 2 of her 9 university terms in real life. Yeah, so 7 of them she did virtually. And again, those are really important, I think, formative years of life. But the good news is she made it. She pulled through. So this is the proud dad moment, by the way, which she couldn't put her hat on straight and the scrunchies on her wrist, but you know, what can you do? Anyway, my job was to coordinate the response across the capital. And as the London leadership team, we used to meet 3 times a day, 8, 12 and 6, always on the teams with all the chief executives across London, working out what the data was telling us and what we needed to do today, tomorrow, and possibly the next day. Yeah, and that is as far away as you could possibly look. If we had a 3-day solution, we called that strategy. Yeah, I remember one evening at 6 o'clock in the evening wondering, would we have enough PPE to get us through the next day? Yeah, we started to get short of renal fluid. We were looking to source internationally the ventilators. I remember learning far too much about the difference between a 3mm tracheostomy tube and a 9mm tracheostomy tube. We were into that level of granular detail. And never did I see the day when I thought London hospitals were going to run out of oxygen. Yeah, but it was that tight at times. But we did it, and we pulled through, and we came out the other end. And I hasten to add, we didn't come out of the other end without lives affected and lives lost. Yeah, but we came through. And many, many people in this room working in this hospital were absolutely fundamental to the response that we made. For those of you who hadn't seen it, I would thoroughly recommend the BBC 2-part documentary on the response and the contribution of the Royal Free. Has anybody seen that? Yeah, really, really, really powerful. And it's describing how this hospital kept people going through the first 2 challenging waves of COVID. And what I'm just going to do is, first of all, I'm going to show you, just to remind you, what London was like. Yeah, what this city of ours was like on the 23rd of March. You forget, don't you? You forget. That's not just what it looked like, that's actually what it sounded like. That is what it sounded like. Quite extraordinary. And what you also notice from this, actually, is the real importance of staff within the NHS and the importance of supporting staff at all times. And again, once again, I would also really want to pay tribute to the charity for the support it's consistently given staff, certainly during my watch, and I know subsequently with Caroline and Pete. It really came to the fore during COVID, where the charity invested millions of pounds in staff physical and psychological support, including the establishment of a supermarket, actually, so staff could have access to food. And post-COVID, I know this support and well-being is continuing. And again, I can genuinely say this is a worldwide phenomenon. You know, the revised focus on staff health and well-being has taken on a new level of importance in a post-COVID international healthcare system. But also, during COVID, the charity's volunteer team rose to the challenge when the global shortage of PPE loomed. From May to August 2020, more than 600 volunteers came together in shifts, 50 people at a time, 2 shifts a day, 7 days a week. And between them, they cut, sewed, packed and delivered 50,000 NHS gauge surgical gowns to support the Royal Free staff to look after its patients during that pandemic. I think that is a truly astonishing achievement, actually. So thank you again to them. And in terms of coming back to my learning during leading London through the first 2 waves of COVID, the thing I would reflect on is the real importance of fully aligned leadership. Yeah, absolutely aligned leadership. So I would point to Sadiq Khan in the Mayor's office, were outstanding, as were all of the leaders of all 32 councils across London, and the military in London. I got to know Major General Chris Geeker in charge of the London Army. Absolutely fantastic, the support he collectively gave. And every NHS organisation, including its medical director, its nursing director, its operations director, all stood up to the plate and focused on what we collectively needed to do to meet the challenges that we were facing. And so, for me, my reward for leading NHS for London, I was then asked to go and be the Chief Operating Officer for the whole of the NHS, and I was destined for head office. Head office, here I came. So I went there as Chief Operating Officer for a number of years, leading the NHS through the subsequent waves of COVID. And some people ask me, what was it like? And the answer is political. I'd say, if you want one word, I'd say it's political. So during my time there, I had 5 Secretaries of State and 3 Prime Ministers. Now, you'll notice that Steve Barclay's in there twice, and that's deliberately there because he was in there twice. He went out and he reappeared. And of course, as of today, we could put another one in there, couldn't we, actually? And actually, does any of you know the name of the chairman of the NHS? The NHS has an independent board, an independent chair. Does anybody know the chair? Yeah, Malcolm Grant was the last one but 2, but keep up, Emma, you're doing well. Price was the last one but 4, no, last one but 1. You get in there, get in there. And would any of you recognise him if you walked in? No, you wouldn't, would you? Well, I'll come on to that. It's Richard Meddings, yeah? And the reason I make that point is it's an important point often because often there is conversations about should you bring together the independent board of the NHS with the Department of Health and Social Care and just get rid of the board and have one entity. Now, I am really clear in the context of here that it is really essential that there's an independent board for the NHS, yeah? Because politics and politicians change so often of whatever colour and whatever persuasion. Without an independent board and the continuity that board actually brings, you will never get a medium-term strategic plan for the NHS. Yeah, so the independence of the board, I think, is fundamentally important. And anybody who thinks you can take the politics out of the NHS is wrong, is what I would say. So it's about 10% of GDP, and depending on who you talk to, depending which argument you're trying to win or lose, up to 30 to 40% of public spending goes on the NHS. So it will never, ever be depoliticised. You know, there's always going to be a political angle to what goes on. And can I say, actually, that being one of 5 executive directors on the board of the largest healthcare provider in the world and the 4th biggest employer in the world was frankly a privilege. Yeah? So now, next quiz. If the NHS is the 4th biggest employer in the world, who are the top 3? Chinese Army, very good. No?
Indian Railway.
Indian Railway, Chinese Army, Indian Railway. Walmart, well done. The next slide, please. So Walmart recently knocked the NHS off the podium and into 4th place. Yeah. So being on the board is also, it meant working with some of the brightest and smartest people that I've ever met. Yeah, that board is full of really, really stellar, talented people. Arguing, you know, trying to grapple with some of the most profound and complex challenges that the world is facing. It was, those of you who've been on boards, it is pretty weird having your board meeting live streamed. Yeah, you were having your board meeting in public, but we must have done something right because we didn't lose one of our regular 20 viewers over the whole 4 years that I was there. And just as an aside, the reason that there are so many smart people on the boards of NHS bodies is there are 2 reasons. A is that health really, really matters. Yeah, it's really important. And B, it's really complex and really complicated. And what clever, smart people like is really complex things that really, really matter. Yeah, that's why we get good people involved in those. It did mean spending a far bit of time with politicians, at least my weekly meeting with the Secretary of State. And what I would say, and Steve Powers here has more of this than me, is, well, I might not have agreed with every single bright idea of the day, or the hour, or the minute, or sometimes the second. What I would say is that all politicians I've worked with of all persuasions generally do want the best by the patient, the taxpayer and the NHS. They genuinely do. I've described the political leadership that I witnessed during AIDS and HIV and the political leadership I witnessed during COVID, but I also experienced it here, actually locally, in the local politics of Camden Council and Barnet and Enfield when we secured the funding to rebuild Chase Farm Hospital and actually get the planning permission we needed to open this very building. And those of you who were involved in some of those conversations, well, they were not the easiest that we've ever had. So, and it is the passionate hard work of politicians which does enable us to get things done. Those of you who were here last year will also have heard from Kate Bingham, actually, about the direct political sponsorship she had was fundamental to her ability to get the UK COVID vaccination plan in place, which was world leading. Yet that required political patronage. And I always say to people when they put their heads in their hands at the latest political whimsy, I always remind them that the counterfactual is Russia and China. Yeah, so you just got to bear these things in mind. So just to say, look back on it, in all of that time, what have I learned about leading change in healthcare? Well, in summary, I've learned that to get things done in health, you need three things in place. Yeah. Firstly, you need a higher purpose and a noble cause. You need somebody like William Marsden wanting to create the first healthcare hospital free at the point of need and delivery. You need Nye Bevan wanting to create the NHS. But also, it's like our three previous Marsden speakers, actually. Dame Ruth Carnell's determination to improve stroke outcomes for Londoners. Yeah, Professor Sir Mike Richards' determination to improve cancer outcomes for the whole of England. Yeah, and Dame Kate Bingham's determination to vaccinate the nation against COVID. I mean, those really are noble aims, yeah, higher purpose. And as I've said before, the Royal Free has its own noble aim and its own higher purpose. So this organisation has got its mission and it's got its objectives. The second thing you need is strong clinical and managerial leadership working hand in hand and cheek by jowl, supported by strong, well-led, multidisciplinary and academically aligned teams who are constantly hungry and restless for more. Yeah, teams who are never, ever satisfied. You know, when I used to park my car in the car park in this building, by the time I worked for my office, I'd have 10 people telling me what I needed to do to enable them to do even more than they were already doing at the moment. It's great. It's what you want. It's people who are always hungry and more ambitious for more. And thirdly, you need strong and effective partnerships in place between clinicians, academics, patients, and the small p and capital P politicians, and the communities that we collectively serve and have the privilege to support. In one language, our stakeholders, and in a language which is used elsewhere, our shareholders. Yeah? You need those people aligned. And alongside that, my other reflection is if you look at my own career, bookended and punctuated by AIDS, COVID, and Ebola, the only thing that we can be sure of is that there will be another one. Yeah? And the only other thing I think we can pretty much guarantee is we won't have to wait another 100 years for the next one to turn up, which is why I come back to learning the lessons through the COVID inquiry is really, really important. I sense it gets a bit knockabout at the moment, but actually it's really important the time is taken to consider proper learning so we are as best prepared as we can be for whatever challenge this country faces next. So to conclude, I'll leave you on my reflections with the global healthcare challenges that we face. So wherever I travel the world and wherever I speak to people about what's going on in healthcare, there are four challenges people face. Firstly, it's the burden of disease and the burden of sickness associated with an increasingly ageing population. Yeah, so my mother died a few years ago at the age of 96. Yeah, so for the last 10 years of her life, everything was wrong with her. Yeah, but every now and again, a clever doctor had to work out what was making her sick. Yeah, so the burden of disease. Secondly, it's the relentless march of technology. Yeah, technology. So in this UK, for example, there have been 20 new breast cancer drugs approved since 2017, 8 of which have been approved since January 2021. Yeah, and as we speak here, there'll be more therapeutics and more medicines coming off the global pipeline. And the third thing which is aligned to that is the ever-increasing rise in patient and public expectation of what they expect from their healthcare. And that, of course, is linked to that march in technology and therapeutics. And fourthly, in that context of the increased burden of disease and the relentless march of technology and patient expectation, how does a nation pay for a healthcare system for its citizens? Yeah, those are the four global challenges. Now, there are two new kids on the block, actually. One is the international workforce shortage. Yeah, there is a global shortage of 3 million healthcare professionals at the moment. And again, whenever I speak to, I was at a conference the other day and the chief executive of the largest hospital in Singapore was talking about how challenging he was finding it to recruit nurses. Now, if they're struggling, internationally we're struggling. Yeah? And the final thing, of course, is how do we collectively recover from COVID? So the big learning there is we're all in it together. Yeah? There's not an easy answer out there, which begs the question, are how are we going to get out of this together? Yeah? What are the answers? And is there anybody out there who's cracked it or anybody that we can learn from? Well, to mark the 75th anniversary of the NHS, earlier this year, the King's Fund think tank produced a report on how the NHS compares to healthcare systems in other countries. And it concluded, and I quote, "There is little evidence that one individual country or model of healthcare performs consistently better than another across a range of performance indicators. Countries produce better healthcare for the populations predominantly by reforming the existing model of healthcare rather than by adopting an alternative model," which means you have to work with the national grain rather than against it, because your healthcare system is often as anthropological as it is scientific. Yeah? So you have to work with. But in this context, I think there will be 6 global game-changing things that will have the big difference to healthcare in the future. First 3 are biomedical, and if anybody wants any more detailed knowledge of any of these, there are loads of clever doctors in the room who can pick up the detailed questions answer, one of which is a blood test that will predict if you are likely to get cancer. Yeah. Secondly is the advent of personalised cancer vaccines. Yeah. And thirdly is the advent of mRNA vaccines. And on that latter point, Professor Strauss has agreed to answer any questions of any detail about what that means. And the next 3 are all AI related. Yeah, the first is ambient note-taking, which is basically what it means is a consultation in real time between a patient and a clinician can be recorded, codified and structured in a way which speaks to clinicians and patients alike, and then can be stored and distributed in a way which immediately enables and facilitates patient care, research and for administrative purposes. Yeah, that could be game changing. That could be a 30% productivity gain for clinicians. The second thing is the way we will now be able to pull, organise and structure data in a way which will enable us to identify omissions in patient care in real time. Yeah, in real time. Now, that is the holy grail of some of the early warning systems. We've historically learnt in retrospect what went wrong, rather than in real time what is going wrong to enable us to put it right. And thirdly, it's the opportunity through robotic process automation to take out many of the routine, dull, but nonetheless essential tasks that healthcare has. So those are the big players. Those, I think, are the big things to come, which is why the first step I've taken in my post-NHS career is to join the Royal College of Radiologists. Yeah. Now, the reason I've joined the Royal College is twofold. Firstly, they do link back to those 6 game-changing interventions. Yeah. So they are trying to position themselves as the spokespeople of AI, and also is the clinical oncologists sit within that college, so they are the spokespeople of the future of cancer. But on my first visit to the college, I've realised there's a third reason. So can we have the next? So that's the Royal College of Radiologists there. Yeah, and when I was there, you see on the building 2 to the right, there's a little blue plaque on there. Yeah, I saw that, and this is what the blue plaque said. How spooky is that, hey? So, I can't help thinking William Marsden pulled me through the first 20 years of my career and is pointing the direction for me for the next 10. But the reason I also mention that, it is really aligned to this hospital. Because the other thing I've learned about the future of healthcare, and specialist care in particular, is it's all about scale. It's all about creating centres of excellence which bring together high volumes of patients, high volumes of care to sit alongside centres of clinical and academic excellence, yeah? Which is what this hospital has the opportunity to do. It is essential if we are to research, learn and innovate about how we tackle, cure and care for people with cancer into the future. The Royal Free London is now one of, if not the biggest provider of cancer care to London. Yeah. And as I said before, London is the most important global city. It's got the biggest concentration of secondary care excellence. And it's got 2 of the world's top universities. Yeah. So that's the assets that we're sitting on here. So both in healthcare and in the context of the importance of life sciences to the future of the British economy, because it is about health and wealth, this hospital must play a leading role in looking at how we meet the challenge of cancer. And if I come back to those 3 criteria, you've got them all here. You've got a higher purpose. Yeah, you're clear what you're trying to do. You've got strong, restless and hungry leadership teams and clinical teams, really restless and really hungry. And as this event demonstrates, I think you've got your patients and your communities with you. Yeah, so you have got the criteria for success. So, as I say, I hope you now realise why it's such a privilege for me to be here this evening. Thank you for listening. And ladies and gentlemen, final slide, William Marsden.
Thank you very much indeed for an absolutely wonderful lecture, often funny, often moving, always absolutely fascinating. I'm sure everyone in the room and everyone online will join me in thanking you enormously for that. We've got a very brief amount of time left for questions. We've got some microphones that we will ask anyone in the room who wants to ask a question if they can use those, just so that those online can pick up what you're saying. To give a few minutes just to think about it, I wonder, you gave us some highlights of the number of health secretaries that you've worked with in recent years. You said we had a new one. If you had 5 minutes to bend the ear of Vicky Atkins, what would you tell her about the way that philanthropy and the health service interact, or maybe the way you'd like them to work together?
So I'm going to say two things to that. First of all, she asked me generally, what would I like her to do? I'd say, don't change direction. Yeah, keep on a steady, we got a plan. It's hard, but keep going. The other point I would make is there will never be sufficient public sector capital to achieve what we collectively want to achieve. So partnership, not just with philanthropy, but with industry, with others, is going to be fundamental to getting the healthcare system that we need. We cannot do this purely through public sector capital and taxpayers' money. We've got to bring everybody to the party.
Thank you very much. Right, first hand up was there, so we'll just wait for a microphone to come to you.
I'm going to be provocative. You didn't mention climate change. That's got to have a profound impact on the future of healthcare and global health, surely.
I was so determined not to politicise anything, so thanks for that, Emma. Of course we've got to grapple with climate change, and actually the NHS is doing a lot around that. We just did some work in another organisation I'm involved with on the impact of climate change in the UK on mortality and morbidity. But of course, because we are an equitable climate, it will take longer for it to be felt here. But we see elsewhere that is absolutely starting to be felt. So of course, Emma, we've got to get to grips with that. We have to get to grips with it. Be slower burn here, though.
Hi, thanks for coming this evening. You spoke about staff well-being as being one of the most important things for the NHS going forward. After COVID, obviously staff well-being is probably at its lowest point in a long time. Aside from the work that charities like this do, what do you think needs to happen to improve the well-being of healthcare workers?
Yeah, okay. So first of all, again, I would emphasise what I said when I spoke. This is a global challenge. Yeah, so, and the global challenges are twofold, actually. Firstly, it's our ability to recruit, but as importantly is our ability to retain. So we will all, you know, I'm more used to noisy quitting than quiet quitting personally, but we do know there are a lot of people who are saying they want to go. So the retention is really important. I would argue that some of the really important things you've got to get in place are the basics. So I remember many, many years ago somebody telling me that what staff all need to have is to be within walking distance of a toilet and a kettle. Now, I know that sounds quite mundane, but actually we haven't got that in place everywhere. So it's getting some of the basics in place. It's, you know, it's also some of the basic general management principles, being given feedback on your performance, the ability to ask for help. So I don't think it's rocket science, actually. And I know there's a lot of stuff about pay at the moment. Pay matters, but those things are equally, if not more important, actually. So it's basics, real basics.
Hand up here.
Thank you, and thank you for a really interesting talk with humour. That's extremely difficult. Someone wrote a letter to the paper and said we should increase taxation until there's enough money to pay for the NHS. Now, I don't think we'll ever be, for two reasons. One, we're getting older, and two, because people's demands are too high. So one simple thing we could do, which people don't do, is lead healthier lives. In the Second World War, we had less money and we were healthier than we are today, which tells you something. Now, do you think we could go into schools and teach children, you know, from the age of 5 upwards what to eat, exercise, and gradually instill in them a different sense of care? Because that everyone's always going to be ill, but at least it would keep the costs lower and make it more manageable.
Yeah, do people all hear that? Yeah. So the answer is anybody going to disagree with that? You know, so globally, again, the answer has to be to keep people healthy and well. and keep people out of the expensive end of the healthcare system as long as you humanly possibly can. And we know lots of that. Well, again, I could have started with John Snow and the pump in the middle of Soho, couldn't I? It's about water, it's about nutrition, it's about housing, it is about education. I do think we should be learning, that's terrible English, isn't it? Teaching kids healthy lifestyles very, 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 very early on. You've got responsibilities here, actually, about the food that you sell and what you sell in the shop and all that kind of role modelling. So I think primary prevention is going to be important. What I think is going to be equally as important into the future is secondary care prevention. And I think we now have data tools that we never had before to enable us to pick people up further upstream. So I will use myself as an example. Next year, we're about to roll out lung screening, across the UK. Absolutely fantastic stuff. And you probably might have heard the Chief Executive of the NHS talking this week about a desire to eradicate cervical cancer. So when you get into lung screening, this is based on a trial that people in this room might have been involved in, which is the UCL Summit trial. That's where the research was started. And I was recruited into that trial, because I was a man in my late 50s with a history of very heavy smoking. I have no idea how they found me. I'm sure at some point I signed a bit of paper when I wasn't concentrating, So now the great thing was, I went into that trial, I had my 3 CAT scans, my blood tests taken 3 years, and they found no evidence of cancer. Now, people who might have got evidence of cancer, they would have been able to intervene upstream. So I think that more targeted, personalised prevention. What was the stuff last week about, I think, the use of a particular medicine with, I think, a cohort of 300 women, which reduced the incidence of breast cancer by 50%. Now the trick there is making sure we get to those 300 women. Because I can tell you the 150,000 will come forward, and we know who they are. It's how we make sure we get to the 150,000 who don't. So that use of data to really mine it and to target and be precise in how we do it is half of it. The stuff I didn't talk about, I learned really, really important lessons trying to run the COVID vaccination campaign in London. Where I come back to that population, it's diverse and it's like jelly, and actually organising yourself in a way which enables you to get to what we used to call hard to reach communities requires a totally different approach. And finding those 150,000 women will require a totally different approach. So I think prevention is really important, but it's not just the primary prevention, it's the secondary prevention as well. It's catching people early. And the science will now enable us to do that in ways which we're never able to do before.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question. A hand's gone up over there. Thank you.
I think this is a question related to costs and efficiency, but I think you're quite a proponent of virtual wards. I'm not quite sure I know what a virtual ward is and why they are such a good idea, and what and how it's going to be rolled out if it is indeed a serious proposition.
Right, okay, so what a virtual ward is where you care for somebody in a domestic setting with a level of illness who would traditionally have been cared for in a hospital setting. And the reason you're able to do that is because of the advent of new monitoring technology linked to software which enables you to manage the ward with real human beings following up if you are ill and need further help. Again, speaking to the doctor who is responsible for the £3.5 billion rebuild of the hospitals in Oslo, 500 of the beds that they rebuild will be virtual wards caring for people at home, and they're committed to reduce the actual bed stock by 30%. How many of you want to spend a night in hospital? How many of you like the... I would if I was safer. How would you like the food? So the trick, Emma, you're right, the doctors need to be absolutely convinced that the patient will be as safe in that setting as they are at home. And if you look at the virtual wards we've got in the NHS at the moment, there are about 10,000 open, and the occupancy is about 60%. So I think virtual wards is definitely part of the future. It's not the only answer. We will always need hospital beds, but virtual wards are here and they're here to stay globally.
Thank you to everyone who was brave enough to ask a question, and a particular thanks, of course, goes to our speaker, Sir David Sloman. Please join me in thanking him very much. You turn off your microphone and relax for a moment. Just a few closing words from me. It's always a privilege to be able to host events like this. particularly in a building like the Pears building. As Sir David alluded to, this building absolutely symbolises what can be done when we bring together clinical research and clinical care as close together as possible. And that intersection of research, clinical leadership and philanthropy, indeed, is at the heart of what the Royal Free Charity and the Royal Free London are all about. The charity aims to make a difference every single day, as many of you know, from those small, simple, everyday acts of kindness right through to projects as large as the Pears building. And one such example of how we want to make a difference at the moment is an appeal we're running on behalf of the staff and the patients who use our A&E and our urgent care centres. None of us want to be in A&E, but our local teams are providing exceptional care whenever someone needs them most. And you will all know how tough the winter often can be on A&E teams. So our teams are supporting patients even in the most difficult circumstances, and you can help them as well. So we're raising funds to give A&E and urgent care staff across the Royal Free London better rest spaces, so they've got somewhere to recharge during a busy and difficult shift. We want to make it better, the patient experience better if you're in A&E, so we can make it less overwhelming for people with dementia, for autistic people and those with other forms of neurodivergence. And we want to make more general improvements to the waiting areas and the information that's provided to patients. If you'd like to support that appeal, there are several ways you can do that. You can fundraise for us by taking on the A&E Shift Challenge. There are details on the screen behind me and in the packs for those who are in the room. And if you want to make a donation, you can do that tonight by talking to one of the fundraising team, or you can go to our website and make a gift there. I want to say thank you once again to our incredible speaker, and I want to say thank you to the whole team who are invisible, particularly to those watching online who have made this happen. A huge number of people have been responsible for arranging this evening, and I want to give an enormous thank you to all of them. And finally, to everybody in the room, to everybody who's watching online, thank you for your continued support for the Royal Free Charity and all of the incredible staff at the Royal Free London. Thank you.